Forbes India presents The New at Work, presented by Google Workspace.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Forbes India presents The New at Work, presented by Google Workspace. My name is Manu Balachandra, and joining me today is a rather esteemed panel. We have Mr. Ashwini Kumar, CEO, Suzlon Group. Mr. Ashwini Kumar joined the Suzlon Group as the CEO in October 2020 and is well regarded for his commercial acumen, transformational leadership, and contract management skills. Ashwini has over 3 decades of experience across leading Indian infrastructure and power companies. We're also joined by Dr. Satya R. Sriram, CEO, Preventive Health at Apollo Hospitals Enterprise. Dr. Satya has multi-industry experience in performance transformation, consumer insights-based marketing, strategy development, and has previously worked at McKinsey and the Hindu Group. We have Dr. Jairam Varadaraj, MD, LG Equipments. Dr. Varadaraj is a third-generation entrepreneur from the illustrious business family of LRG Naidu. Mr. Varadaraj is an ex-chairman of the Tamil Nadu State Committee of the Confederation of Indian Industry and a past member of the Southern Region Council of CII. We have Mr. Athar Shahib, Managing Director, Suari Global. Mr. Shahib has more than 32 years of experience across project finance, strategy, business development, advisory, and last but not the least, we have Ms. Sumedha Chakrabarti, the country head, India and SAARC business at Google Workspace. Sumedha has over 15 years of experience in sales and management consulting, in technology and tech startup. She was awarded the Chicago Booth India Scholarship and was on the Dean's Honor List at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Thank you, Dr. Satya, Sumedha, and gentlemen, for joining us. In our previous discussions, we've been largely talking about how the pandemic has impacted people and processes across the spectrum. The new normal and the hybrid work models have presented its own set of challenges and hurdles. Work from home felt like a boon in the initial days of COVID-19 crisis, and with the power of technology emerged the term work from anywhere. But along with the new dimension and definition of work, there's also a new spotlight on juggling responsibilities between work and home as employees witness fatigue and exhaustion. So what role should an organization play in such a situation? What measures should they take to ensure personal boundaries stay intact and employees continue to feel motivated and stay productive? Today, my esteemed panelists will help us decode how workplaces have transformed at their core and how the changes they have made in their cultural fabric of the management. Let me begin today's discussion with comments on how the workspace has changed over the past 2 years and what are the key differences when managing culture remotely or in a hybrid way. We will start with Mr. Ashwini and then go around to the others.
Thanks, Manu. I think so. Before we start defining workplace and the culture there, I think so the sheer definition of work itself has probably undergone a change over the past 2 years. So is the work your job responsibilities? Is it the work your designation and the place you go? Or is it the work the expectations that all the other stakeholders have of you? And I think so in order to answer many of these dynamic questions, which have actually changed over the past 2 years, it is very, very important to understand the so-called, and I'll put the word very loosely, the white-collar workers and the rest who actually do the work which makes the real difference. So for Suzlon, if I talk about Suzlon, the manufacturing works and the sites and the services there are not going to change at all, or actually did not change at all, were actually part of essential services. So only 10% of our employees, strength of over 5,000, were impacted in terms of where they go to work, how the work was defined. For the remaining 90%, while the world around them has changed in terms of what are the support they could get, not only from within Suzlon, but from outside the company also, including government and other stakeholders, other facility providers. And their own job did not much change. So they were responsible for ensuring that the wind turbines continue to function as usual. They were responsible to ensuring that we continue producing the goods that we have promised our customers, and so on. So while the workplace or work from home or work from everywhere did change for some of our employees, For majority, it continued the same way, though in a very different context with various support systems that were present prior to 2020 were not being present. And that cultural change of how to do work in those scenarios were the biggest cultural change that we brought ourselves in our organizations, where people felt needed to feel more empowered, needed to get more self-discipline, needed to undergo probably a little lower training and development, which was there, and still deliver the results that they were supposed to. I mean, that's what we might take initially on this subject.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Dr. Satya here. Dr. Satya, your thoughts? I mean, I don't think you could sort of do with, work from home. Take us through your journey here.
Thank you, Manu. Absolute a delight to be here this afternoon as part of this panel. And you're right, as part of the healthcare industry, there was absolutely no work from home or remote and no hybrid. And I think the context in which we functioned, though, did shift. And therefore, there was a transformation thanks to the last 2 years. And I'd highlight 3 areas that we see a distinct shift. The first, I think, is common to many industries, many of us, which is a digitization at an unprecedented pace. We overnight had to move to systems that would enable us to usher patients, manage people, all contactless, to be able to get through large volumes that the hospital system was almost breaking at, right? So the first one is around digitization. And it required people who had never taken to the computer or needing to understand the technology to be able to deliver the operations, needing to do so very, very quickly. So the second area was around functioning under pressure and stress and needing to take decisions with the information that is there. I think often we are privileged that we have either time to gather a lot of information before we make decisions. But in this case, I think we were under enormous pressure all the time to be able to just keep moving. And therefore, with whatever you needed to do or whatever information you had, you just had to make the decision and move on and deal with the consequences of that decision. And the third thing, which I think is particularly special and impacted culture a lot, we had about 80% of our employees that are frontline and 20% that I'd say are in administrative roles. And so the 20% could technically have worked remotely, but there was a sense of solidarity, right, alongside our colleagues who were doing so much frontline and having so much exposure and taking so many risks. Every one of us in the administrative roles also were there side by side. And culturally, there was a solidarity that built amongst the corporate and the frontline employees that was again, unprecedented.
I think we'll come back to the bit about health, safety, and morale. Considering you were at the forefront. But let me bring in Dr. Jairam Varadaraj here. Your opening thoughts, sir, on how managing culture remotely or in a hybrid way, how that has changed. The key difference that you see now.
Thank you, Manu. It's great to be with this panel. I'd like to share some things that happened as part of COVID. When COVID hit everyone end of March, April of 2020, first thing is it kind of challenged us in terms of our walking the talk on our values. We pride ourselves in how good we are with people, especially people with the least amount of voice in the company. And here is a pandemic that, in the initial stages looked like a long drawn out process. So we took a very hard decision. We said we are not going to let anyone's job go, and we are not going to cut anyone's compensation, even by a rupee. That was a very tough decision. We're keeping our fingers and our toes crossed that we'll be able to do it. But we took, we were prepared for a loss. It didn't matter. We felt that people and their well-being was more important. And that helped us, because that helped us build and reinforce what we stand for. And I think that was a very positive thing that we did. And the second thing is, it was more the whole work from home, hybrid work environment really challenged the company, and we're still going through that challenge, is to look at your job description in more greater detail. Typically job descriptions are done on the basis of inputs to a job. I need engineering degree, I need so many years of experience, you should have done these kinds of projects, etc. But a work from home or a hybrid work environment is making us focus more on outputs, the outcomes of the job. The outcomes of a job, you can do it in 4 hours, 5 hours, or even in a couple of hours. It doesn't matter what the end of the day, it is what you do, what you produce. And I think that the COVID situation brought that to light quite sharply. And we're going through this whole process of rewriting all our job descriptions on the basis of outcomes. And the third permanent change that we did was really questioned. We have businesses all over the world, and we have salespeople all over the world, and it's probably only in India that we have the possession of sales and service offices in different cities in the world, and we questioned that. And we said, no, we don't really need it. We create co-working spaces, provide people the opportunity to go to co-working spaces. And it's been a very positive experience for all of us. So I think these are some fundamental and permanent changes that happened during this period.
Absolutely. Mr. Shahab, let me bring you here. Your thoughts on how things have changed?
Thanks, Manu. Pleasure to be here with the esteemed panelists. I think it's been a huge experience for me personally and for the organizations that I worked with during the last couple of years. I think keywords were you had to unlearn, you had to adapt, you had to stretch, you had to lean into people. And I think both at the level of individuals and the organizations, it was a test of whether you can walk the talk on your values and how much you can really stretch. And just like the previous speaker said, we took a stance that we will not let anybody go, regardless of how much difficulty we face as an organization. We will protect the compensation of our employees, and not only our direct employees, but even contract workers. Then not only our own employees, but the extended communities around us, we will demonstrate that we are a caring organization. And I think, we had to make many tough choices as the pandemic was spreading. You had to run operations. You had to make sure that you were financially viable and operationally ready, but you still had to protect people. So very tough choices had to be made. And like everybody else, we were also redefining the job descriptions, the roles, seeing how you could use technology. And I think the way people came together individually, as teams, as they adapted to new modes of working, taking care of each other. And I remember those difficult times when, we were under lockdown and there were bachelors who needed food at home. There was nobody to cook. And how support groups from within the organization then reached out to them, and some families took responsibility of providing food to the bachelors. So I think the last couple of years, culturally and from a value perspective, I think we have all become stronger, and I think our ability to adapt has also increased substantially. And like most of the organizations, a lot of these changes in the last couple of years have forced us to have a rethink on the basics of how people work. So like the previous speakers were mentioning, we all are looking at how to redefine the work in the place. What are the kind of jobs and tasks that people actually do? How do people actually do work in the office? And how can we do it differently and more efficiently? So I think it's been a huge learning experience for me. And I think that these are the opening thoughts that I would like to leave for the rest of the panel.
Let me bring in Sumedha here. Sumedha, your thoughts?
So I think the workplace transformation has been phenomenal in the last 2 years, specifically because of pandemic, and not just in India, but globally. And there are a lot of learnings for all of us across the board has been initiated because of this change that happened globally. uh, there were new habits that were formed, and what we have realized are very essential three tenets that we have also learned at Google from our research. Number one, time is of utmost importance, and we started to value our time much more than we used to in the past. Human connections have become very, very crucial. Us not having the liberty of meeting up with our colleagues, our managers, peers on a regular basis in person actually has really instilled in us the importance of having that human connection. So, human connections have started to make a lot more sense to us now, earlier, um, before the COVID. And the third is work is no longer a place. What we learned in the last 2 years is that even without being in the workplace, which is office, we have been able to do our work. So work is no longer a place. It's just your state of mind, your willingness to do or get things done from wherever you are. So these three tenets are the key pillars of the transformation that has happened in the workplace. And most organizations who have been successful in managing this transition have been very true to these factors that have impacted their employees. And what we see is that most technologies which are being successful in supporting this kind of transformation in the workplaces are trying to mimic these cultural and these emotional shifts that have happened in the workforce in the last 2 years to really make it a successful transition from a technology support point of view as well. So that's how I would like to summarize the fact that the change has been tremendous, but the change is here to stay. And I think it is for the positive. We can get a lot more done, keeping in mind the priorities that each of us have with our families, with our loved ones, as well as with our colleagues and our peers in the workplace. So everything has evolved in a more positive way, is what I would like to believe. And many leaders who've seen this transition successfully in their organizations have also commented on similar lines.
Great. Okay. So, just coming back to Mr. Ashwini here. Ashwini, how is the new normal redefining work and personal boundaries in your space?
I think so. The boundaries, if you actually believe in most jobs, were never there. We in India as well as most part of the world, the work and your life, work is actually integral part of what you do, and it takes care of almost half of your waking up hours. So while the work life, I would say, balance or intermingling became much and much more. The people who really had issues with it were the people who were probably doing two personalities, or having one personality for work and one personality for home or other parts, etc. But other than that, I think so. Work being an important part of life in most of us professionals did not, I would say, change much. Two important qualities that the workplace saw, which came out both from whatever was happening outside, which is in terms of pandemic, as well as because they were operating in a very familiar, homely situation, where one was considerate and one was kindness. So I thought those two qualities stood out by most people, in addition to, of course, empathy, helping others and whatever goes on. But people were much more considerate than they would be in a typical, if I can call it, the strong work culture that we always had, in not only in our organization, in most organizations. The second were where people were trying to be more and more kind. In fact, if there's a shift in the culture which is required, or which is already happening, but probably can be given more thought focus by most organization, it is on these two traits. After IQ and EQ, where people were more interested, measuring things like your intelligence or your emotional social skills. I think so. These two skills are something which will play a huge role in going forward in terms of leadership, as well as getting the right balance of how organization will look like and function in future.
Let me bring in Mr. Athar here. Mr. Athar, what behaviors are most important, when managing culture in a hybrid environment, and what are the important elements for creating organizational cultural change according to you?
I think you need to have the right messaging and the tone from the top. That's extremely important. And I spoke about adapting earlier, unlearning, adapting. Traditionally, HR seems to be, particularly in a manufacturing environment, which some of us come from, they can be very rigid in terms of their policies and practices. And I found that they were struggling to really adapt to the new normal. And you not only have to change mentally, physically, I think you have to also worry about how people are going to work from home, whether people would have adequate physical infrastructure at home, whether it would be an unwanted invasion of privacy into somebody's home, whether, people have sufficient space in their homes, for example. So I think, as Ashwini was pointing out, the concern, the need to know more, and I think we all got to know our colleagues much better during the last couple of years, and the space between personal and professional somewhat blurred, because unless you provided access to your personal life, the organizations would not know how to accommodate your special needs. And at every stage, while dealing with young people or senior people, new employees versus old employees, married employees versus single employees, people having kids, having no kids, I think some of these things which used to remain outside the purview of strictly quote unquote professional or official engagement, it all came into play because all the organizations had to adjust, adapt, and tailor make the new working policies or practices, so that the employees could continue to deliver to the best of their ability and within the constraints of the situation. And I think two things are extremely important. One is the man at the top has to be very, very consistent and clear in his mind. Second is there has to be a constant communication. It's extremely important to communicate and communicate. I think one of the biggest learning of the last 2 years is the need to communicate with utmost honesty and complete integrity. As everybody was changing, lives were going upside down. People were losing friends and relatives. There was a complete emotional turmoil. I think the need to communicate with clarity, with integrity, with empathy, with passion has never been greater.
No, absolutely. And just taking on, to what you mentioned about, blurring of that personal space. Going forward, how much do you think that's going to impact in terms of, how the workplace will sort of shape up?
I think the ball is still very much in the court of both the employers and the employees. And the pendulum appears to have swung a little bit on the other side as well. Okay. Where I have seen within many organizations that the demands that organizations have made on employees in the name of remote work have been very significant. Not enough care has been taken about the availability of physical infrastructure in the homes of people. People may not everybody has a spare room where they can retire and work. And it has to be very, very person specific. And I think to that extent, there's still work to do in customizing things. And then one thing that HR does very quickly is to come up with a standard one shoe fits all kind of a strategy. And that's not going to work. I think we have to be very sensitive to the individual. We have to take into account the nature of the job, the kind of person. You can't ask a youngster to work remotely all the time, because then he or she is going to lose out big time on the learnings that he or she will get in an office environment. So the message that I would like to give to people is to continue to be very sensitive to individuals' requirements. reach out to people, do your surveys, and don't be dogmatic and don't try to push things as one organizational policy that everybody has to follow. I think that that's very important.
Dr. Satya, what are your thoughts on what Mr. Shah sort of spoke about? Pushing down things on individuals and sort of being sensitive to individual needs. What has been your experience, especially when you had to sort of digitize quickly? How did you sort of adapt to it?
No, several things that Mr. Sharp said actually resonated, right? When it comes to the healthcare frontline workers, especially during the peak of the waves, we had to be particularly careful and cautious. At the same time, be able to meet the needs of the employees themselves while ensuring that the patient care does not suffer in any way. So, one example, I think our entire rostering process took a massive, actually went through a massive transformation. We obviously digitized it, but we also threw in an element of a different approach to rostering. We broke up the employee base into 3 batches. Each batch ended up working a little more every day of the week for about a week. So they had a little more of an extension of their normal shifts. But then we were able to give them the following week off as rest. That A did 2 things, right? A enabled them to actually truly de stress because they were working in extremely high pressure environments. And B, ensure that their exposure isn't continuous. So we were able to actually take them away from the hospital environment and let them be at home for a full week. And so this kind of rostering, a different way that we approached it for this period, I think it's something that again was required to meet the sensitivities of the particular nature of the job as well as the context that we were in. Another thing we did was actually create little markets outside the hospital 3 days a week so that people could buy their vegetables, perishables, groceries, and didn't have to go somewhere else to the market during the lockdown hours. It just there was no time, and also didn't want them mingling with the general public. So we created these little markets within the hospital campus itself a couple of times a week so that we could enable people to take care of their shopping and daily needs during the peak times.
Sumedha, your thoughts on how how are you keeping employees safe, well, and productive in a hybrid work environment, and how do we ensure that new work pattern doesn't really introduce any new risks?
Some of our policies have also transformed and transformed for good post the pandemic has hit, and we have also tried to evolve the way we think about return to work. So Google has made a policy which is for here to stay of a hybrid work mode for good. We're not going back to the 5 days work week. We are right now trying out a hybrid work week where 2 days in office and 3 days work from anywhere is what we are trying to inculcate across the board, across the globe. So across our entire employee population, that is the model that we are rolling out. There are edge cases where employees in certain groups have the possibility to actually go for 100% remote, given they are in roles where you can do work remotely completely. Of course, they have to go through certain approvals of VPs and senior leadership, but those options are also there. But the mainstream option that we are rolling out is the hybrid way of working. So that's the number one and the biggest change that we have launched in Google. The second one is we have brought in an option of letting an employee work from any part of the world or any other country other than the base country of the employee for 1 month in a year. And the tax implications and all will be taken care of while you get to work from any other country, if that is your home country and you would want to work or operate from there. That's an option we give our employees as well. And this is not paid leave. This is proper like work mode. We're not talking about 1 month of vacation. We're talking about a remote option of working from any other country. So that's another very, very big change that we have brought in, again, to support um, folks who have left their families in other countries or would want to have that option of having a hybrid way of working, not just from in country but from anywhere else in the world. Again, a very significant change, which we hope will stay depending on how employees react to that. And the third most important tenet I wanted to talk about is Google inherently believes, and we have a team which we call the People Ops team, which does a lot of research, rolls out white papers around human psychology and what works best. How do teams collaborate in the most optimal fashion? And our research says that the change is something that we need to be okay with, and we need to go back and relook our policies um, every quarter, or if needed every half a year. Whatever policies I talked about that have been rolled out in the recent past are also not written in stone. We are having a constant monitoring of how employees are reacting to these changes, and how are they uh, adjusting to these changes. And we are open to relook at some of these policies again, maybe 6 months down the line, a year down the line, because we genuinely believe that the change that has been brought over by the pandemic cannot uh, cannot rely on very fixed set of processes or rules in the longer term. We need to keep coming back to the whiteboard, reviewing our processes, reviewing our policies, our employee policies, work policies, and checking in on whether the psychological safety of our employees that we try to provide through this hybrid way of working is actually getting rolled out in the fashion that we would want. So revisiting the policies is very important. So that's the third tenet that we are going to look at. So everything that I said could change in 6 months if it's not working for Google, and that is also okay. So I think, and that is the final message that I would like to leave with. And I've seen a lot of other leaders in other organizations resonate very strongly with that, because we don't know what's in store for us next, and we need to be prepared. And the best way to be prepared is to be willing to change some of these practices if needed.
Dr. Jairam, what are some of the various measures that your organization is working to sort of evolve the company culture into a more hybrid workspace?
So I think one of the things that a good friend of mine talked about it. He said, why do we call it work-life balance? You know, when you say work-life balance, it means work is bad and life is good. Now, one thing that COVID has brought home is the hybrid work environment, where we need to question how do we make work as good as life, and not bring in the validity for something called work-life balance. And I think increasingly we are looking at what is a person's job in terms of outcomes, rather than worry about the standard measures of a job. Did you clock in? Did you sign this report? Did you ask for permission? So quite a bit of work that we are doing now is to define jobs as in outcome mode. And the second is we completely got rid of a lot of our policies, which segues into the second kind of broader aspect of management, which is a management based on trust. Um, we learned a lot from the Netflix book, which says the no rules rule. We really literally adopted quite a bit of that, and we said, for instance, we don't have a leave application. All you need to do is just communicate to your manager that you're going to be on leave. You don't have to get permission. You don't have to get permission for travel. You don't have to fill in a travel application form or submit your travel bill. It all goes through. The fundamental thing is we trust you, and we hope that you will be worthy of that trust. So that's a big shift that we did. And during the pandemic, we realized one thing is, the purpose of an organization, if it is fundamentally followed, the profits follow a lot more healthily. And this is something that we have learned. And we are now transforming the organization in many significant dimensions to really pursue your purpose first. And then don't put profits ahead of purpose. And I think this has been a good lesson for us. And it's a good transformation for us.
Organizations, of course, need to make sure that workers have an improved standard of living and compensation policies that are on par with global standards. What are your thoughts on global pay parity?
I'm a big fan and a champion of building a competitive business on the back of expensive Indians and not on the back of cheap Indians. We all go to work, and one of the reasons why we go to work is to improve our standard of living. And one aspect of standard of living is what we earn. So if we architect our strategy of our business on the basis that our people are going to be less expensive than the rest of the world, we are literally shooting ourselves in our foot. Maybe as CEOs and leaders of the business, we are kind of insulated from that because our compensation may be at global standards. But bridging that inequity on levels below us is something that is very, very dear to us. It's a fundamental pillar of our strategy. We have a factory in Italy where we pay our blue collar employee 30 lakhs because that's the market and that's what you need to pay to get them to work. And we have a specific goal to make our blue collar employees as expensive as our Italian colleagues. And we are well on the track of making it happen. I'm hoping in the next 5 to 8 years, we will get there. Right now we are at 11 lakhs, and I think we will get to that. So this is just one example, and similar transformation is what we want to do. The fundamental goal is we need to be competitive globally on the back of expensive Indians. And that's a pursuit that is very dear to us.
I want to take Ashwini and Ashwini's view on this first, then I'll bring in Mr. Shahab here. Ashwini, your thoughts on what he just spoke about?
No, I think so. It's very, very important that any industry which is global in nature and competes globally has to benchmark their care for employees also of the same standard, not only compensation, but all the other policies and facilities that other people get. So while we compete with the likes of the big multinationals in India as well as globally, we have to ensure that we take care of our employees in similar manner. Otherwise, they will always have the option to go from one place to another. In this whole context of development of Indian economy as a manufacturing hub, we are exporting a lot in our industry in terms of components as well as finished products to rest of the world. It is important that it becomes not only a cost-saving exercise, but a quality exercise. And quality is one part, but also the health, safety, environment, all the aspects, both for the employees as well as for the places you operate in or you manufacture in or you do services in, has to be global standards if you want to really compete globally.
Shahab, your thoughts on that?
No, I tend to agree with both the previous speakers. And I think wherever we have global roles, we compensate at par with the global compensation. So there's no doubt in my mind at all, whether that role exists in India or abroad, I think you have to compensate people accordingly. And if we want our industries to become competitive, to become world beaters, I mean, you have to compensate people well. So nothing more to add beyond what the colleagues have said already.
Dr. Satya, could you take us through some of the latest measures that have been taken across your organization to drive employee engagement while driving the right balance between remote and in-person work? I know a lot of them are, in person, but going forward, how things will be.
Yes, as you said, a lot of it is in person. That said, What the last 2 years have done is make virtual connectivity much more comfortable than we had originally expected, right? So meetings, all-day workshops, multi-day conferences, some of these things that it was almost impossible for us to think about in person. We are now able to break it up and do things virtually, involve people at multiple levels to be able to do so. I think the other thing that at Apollo we realized and have made a priority in the last 6 months or so is the wellness of our own employees. Quite ironic that we're in the healthcare business, but we also realized, and the pandemic taught us all, that it's exceptionally important to put that front and center. And so, one of the things that the chairman insisted, every employee of Apollo Hospitals has had their annual health check, and therefore it was a massive push to make that happen. There were enough that resisted, like in any organization, but this was a priority. And I think having seen patients that were not in the peak of health, that did not know that they were not in the peak of health, go through a very tough time, helped us take our own employee wellness and health much more seriously.
Let me come back to Ashni here. Ashni, how can digital tools be used to reinforce culture within the organization and earn loyalty from the employees?
See, any tool which is working remotely brings two things. One, because it is remote, there's always a sense of detachment there. I mean, I still believe, and that's a personal preference, but face to face, looking at body language of people and and interacting would definitely reinforce much more than any remote tool will do. Having said that, the remote had its own advantage. Like we saw, and I'm just going back 30 years or before the even invent of email. You know, a paper would come to you or a meeting, and you have to decide right there and there. Emails taught us that you can take your time and delve upon it, do your research, and then work and give your answers and take decisions. And of course, decision making became much better off. And the same thing applies to several digital tools that have come in, both in terms of either HR policies or a simple, I would say, management tools. And that detachment actually sometimes plays nicely, so that you don't have to immediately respond, which you have to if I'm in the room with you and ask you a question, you have to respond there. And maybe the solutions sometimes are more innovative, better for the organization, and better for the general environment.
Mr. Shab, your thoughts on that? I mean, what digital tools have you really been invested in to sort of streamline communication amongst employees and with the organization?
I think, of course, everybody has used the Microsoft tools, the video conferencing tools. But beyond that, we used a health monitoring tool. And what we
Okay.
did was we quickly developed an app and said everybody will quickly every morning send a health update. And there is a team, and the information would go directly to a medical team in the organization. And I think that had a very positive impact because immediately it sent a message that the organization cares for me or cares for my family. And then, of course, there was a fallback mechanism to deal with any eventuality, and that also was communicated to people in advance. So a lot of huge comfort during those difficult times that there's a caring company which will take care of them, God forbid, if they get into any difficulty. Now, coming to the tools that everybody speaks about, I think I have seen both the positive and the negatives of that. Positive was it was very easy to organize meetings and conferences. And I have held sitting from my home meeting with 50 odd employees in one shot. And when I connected with them on my screen and spoke to them eye to eye, it was better than meeting them in office. And I think I connected with them exceedingly well. But on the other hand, I've also got feedback about some of these meetings becoming very intrusive at a very short notice. And I think the whole idea of remote work to give some flexibility to people, I think that somewhere got compromised. And series of meeting perpetually on the screen, and somewhere that balance or the judgment between the people and teams was not exercised well. So used judiciously, it can have a great impact, but if you're not careful enough, I've also seen the downside. And it's not easy, and particularly I keep on bringing this point about physical well-being. Not everybody's got a proper space at home, comfortable chairs, nice surroundings, no distractions to focus on work. I think those things are also extremely important.
Dr. Jairam, going forward, what will reintegration look like at the workplace? And how are you sort of supporting those working from home with their whole IT setup?
I think there is nothing new that, with the peak of the pandemic, we had provided all the tools that were necessary for our employees who are working from home and made sure that they are comfortable. So, right now, our policy is, to Mr. Shahab's point, I think, or Mr. Kumar's point, I think we believe that periodic face-to-face engagement is very important to build the right culture in the organization and to foster a certain relationship, which is important. So from the pandemic time to now, actually the extent of work from home has reduced, and we had built the infrastructure for work from home quite extensively during the pandemic. So we are in good shape as far as enabling employees to be comfortable when they're working from home.
Absolutely. I think with that we can come to the I thought we can take closing comments from all of you, and that's mostly about how when you're going ahead, keeping employees safe, well, and productive in the whole hybrid setup. How do we ensure that new patterns don't sort of increase or introduce new risks? Let me start with Mr. Ashwini and then get the views from others.
I think so. The important part is if you define work for yourself and each employee knows that this is what is expected of him or her, that will take care of most of the, I would say, because most of us do want to contribute both to our work or to society and others. One of the important things that we had to tell our people that you are actually providing electricity of almost 4 to 5% of India's grid. So you are working actually on site and continue to do your job in the normal manner so that others can work from home. So the taking pride in their job was very, very important. The second one, which is very important, was to change the whole corporate language from vision and mission statement to more like your belief and purpose statement. Why do we exist, etc. I think so. Once these two elements, that is what is expectations and results and pride in the employee, and two, what is this whole purpose and belief why this organization exists, is amalgamated, then you will actually get a much better culture. And we are seeing this as we are seeing more and more employees coming in, their own efficiency, their own productivity, while they come back to office is also increased considerably. And of course, now we have to, of course, design the proper training for continuing to make sure that the routine, health, safety, quality, and others are not impacted, which do require some sort of a diligence and cannot be left open-ended. But I think so once you take care of all these three important elements, you will always see a much better organizations going.
Dr. Satya, your thoughts, as we go forward, how do we ensure that new work patterns don't introduce new risks?
Well, I think that's hard for us to say to foresee what's coming. I think the last 2 years taught us that very lesson. The last 2 years were exceptionally tough on many people, personally, professionally. There was some good also that came out of it. But overall, I think very, very tough. As we move forward, I think the sense of purpose from one's work is going to become even more important. That aside, I think the one thing for all of us to keep in mind as we enter this sort of new normal is what we are not seeing, what we are not seeing as obvious symptoms, a sense of mind health issues, stressors that we unknowingly are going to have to face as we change our work patterns and come back to work, or even as we are ramping up back to a new normal now, I think is something for all of us to watch out for, and as employers be cautious about, and find ways to increase the awareness around these silent mind health concerns that are likely to arise.
Dr. Jairam?
I think the COVID thing has taught us one thing, or demonstrated one very strong thing: the kind of trust that people demonstrated across our stakeholders. Our customers trusted us, our employees, our suppliers, our distributors, our investors, and society at large. I mean, there was a huge amount of trust that was demonstrated across the board. And I think that was a big revelation for us. And I think what we are now doing is trying to build on it by saying, reflecting internally and saying, what are all our policies that are based on lack of trust? And say, how can we take this forward by building policies that are foundational on trust? Because 99% of the people are trustworthy. And if you reflect back, most of our policies are written on the basis that people cannot be trusted. It's almost like that, the conundrum that we have. The law says that you're innocent until proven guilty, but the law is actually written in a way that you're guilty until proven innocent. So we're fundamentally looking at turning the whole thing on its head and saying, can we build an environment of trust across our stakeholders and the company? I think that's proving out to be very powerful for us.
Mr. Shah?
So Manu, your question is about reintegration. Your question is about risks. And I think there is a great risk that the organizations will regress to where they came from. And the desire to control, the desire to make sure that we have the same old paradigm reinstated, there is a big risk as far as the organizations are concerned. For the employees, I think they have to adapt, and as the offices are getting filled, a lot of people are finding it difficult to, and we have seen, in fact, the transition when you had kids at home who were not going to school and both parents had to go to office. And there was a huge issue with a lot of families. So even now, when the schools have opened up, I think there's still a residual adjustment or adaptation that everybody is going through. And of course, we have seen the great resignation phenomenon, particularly in the Western countries. So the risk is that if we do not care of what our colleague told us about the mental well-being and the physical well-being, or we allow the organizations to regress back to some of the older practices, I think the whole advantage of the last couple of years would be lost. So I completely endorse what our fellow panelists are telling us, that the time is to hold on to these advantages, to let go of some of those silly old policies and procedures that hold back initiative and productivity, and then focus on the output. And that's a wonderful goal to pursue. And I think let go of the control mindset. These are very important things for people at the top. I'm sure if you convey with conviction, with integrity, with passion, the employees do respond. And of course, there is a great opportunity to build a better, healthier workplace, picking up the right lessons from the last couple of years, Manu.
Sumedha, your thoughts on how things will shape up as we go forward and as we come out of COVID-19 crisis and going forward into this hybrid work model?
While I talked a lot about organizations being more employee friendly, or in terms of being more willing to change, I think employees or users um, of this hybrid way of working have also become much more adaptable and willing to adjust in these last 2 years. If given an option 2 years back, personally, we would want to stick to one way or the other, right? Going to office every day, or wanting to take a complete remote way of working. Today, we are okay with the hybrid way of working. Today, we are okay to tell our colleagues that I have a 5 p.m. or I have a 4 p.m. appointment with the doctor, but I can come back and log back in later. And it's not just one type of job code that allows you to do that. That mindset shift of having an opportunity to share this with your colleagues and be okay with it, that I'm flexible in my ways of working, and please be flexible in accepting that as well. I think that acceptance of of employees have also increased tremendously in the last 2 years, which is here to stay, and again another very big positive change. So other than technology enabling that, which I've already talked about, organizations trying to enable that, which I've already talked about, I think people in their own minds have become more adjusting and accommodating to other people's needs. And that is a very, very positive shift, which I feel is here to stay, and is for the best for all of us.
On that note, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. I'm sure the audience who've joined us today have gained a lot of insights from this conversation. So thank you once again, and we hope all of you stay safe. Thank you.
Forbes India presents The New at Work, presented by Google Workspace.